president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has been sacked by his party as leader. Delegates at the party meeting were seen breaking into loud singing and dancing when the announcement was made. Well, Emmerson Mnangagwa, the deputy, who was of course sacked just a few days ago, has been announced as Mugabe's replacement as leader of the party. But important to stress that Mr. Mugabe is still officially Zimbabwe's president. The pressure to remove him from power completely is, of course, building. Let's go now to Ben Brown in Harare. Ben, a momentous morning.
Yeah, when you think about it, hugely dramatic, Gita, because Robert Mugabe has been the leader of ZANU-PF and the leader of this country for 37 years, almost 4 decades. And now that party, ZANU-PF, has simply turned its back on him, said it's had enough of him, sacked him, really humiliated him and kicked him out as party leader. Extraordinary. This was the Central Committee of ZANU-PF meeting here in Harare, where I am, and celebrating, as you say, after that decision. Also stripping his wife, Grace Mugabe, of her party membership and making Emmerson Mnangagwa, who she forced out as vice president of this country, making him now the party leader and the front runner to become the new president. He's the favoured candidate of the military. But as you say, and it's important to stress, he is still technically president of this country. He may not effectively be in power because he's been under house arrest. But he is still technically president. And the military here who took over on Wednesday, they've got to find a way of constitutionally removing him as president. They don't want this to look like an old-fashioned African coup d'etat where they simply force him out of office. So it does look like the most likely way that they will do that, following this decision to kick him out as party leader, is to get Parliament to impeach him as president. That's if he doesn't go voluntarily. He is in talks at the moment with the military high command. We understand here in Harare, his motorcade was seen leaving his private residence a little bit earlier today, heading from his residence, the Blue Roof, to State House, and he's in those talks. If they can persuade him just to step down, I think that is what everybody pretty much in Zimbabwe would like to see. But if they can't persuade him to go voluntarily, the indications are he won't go. He's being pretty stubborn about it, as he has been for many years. Then they'll have to get Parliament to constitutionally impeach him.
Ben Brown, stay with us for a moment. I just want to turn to our colleague Andrew Harding, who I gather is inside the headquarters of ZANU-PF. Andrew, what's the information that you've got?
Indeed, I've just stepped outside. Journalists have been asked to leave the hall. They are still, it seems, formalising the process of removing President Mugabe. But the decision has been taken. I spoke to a senior figure from ZANU-PF, Paul Mangwana, in the hall, and he said, "We are removing him. We are very happy and excited. This is the dawn of a new era. We want to give him a dignified retirement. He can go farming." And he confirmed that we've elected Mnangagwa as the new president of the party with immediate effect. So ZANU-PF, with ruthless determination, has come 180 degrees from a week or so ago when it voted unanimously to kick Mr. Mnangagwa out of the party, forced him into exile. Suddenly he's back, he's on top, and Mr. Mugabe's humiliation is, well, it's hard to see how much more humiliation he's prepared to accept. If he digs his heels in and forces the Parliament to impeach him, it can only get worse for him now, I think.
He is, though, technically still president of Zimbabwe. Do we know what exactly his demands are? What potential fate is in store for Robert Mugabe now?
We don't know. I was talking to the war veteran leader, Chris Mutsvangwa, a little earlier. He's the one who started yesterday's protest that turned into something so enormous. And he said if the generals in their talks with Mr. Mugabe can't sort this out very quickly, he said we will go back on the streets and we will sort this out ourselves. Very fiery language. He described this as being a coup, but not a usual African coup where somebody ends up with being hanged from a tree, as he put it. He said we don't want that to happen, but he made it very clear that Mr. Mugabe's time in office, well, was running out by the minute.
And what is the process by which whoever replaces the leadership of the party is made president also?
Well, that's the thing they're still working out. There is the very keen desire here to have the sort of veneer of legality in all this. And it's fascinating to see how people are trying to find the right words to explain what is already simply a fact. Mr. Mugabe has been kicked out, and the law and the political process has still to catch up with that. So it could be through impeachment, it could be that Mr. Mugabe simply resigns, or it could be a more long-term process of popular pressure, political pressure, and eventually he simply becomes irrelevant.
And Andrew, I saw it reported by Reuters that Grace Mugabe has been expelled from the ruling party. Obviously, she's been a very divisive figure and has triggered perhaps this whole event. Do we know now what will become of her and the whole family?
We don't, and I think that's going to be a key part of these negotiations between the generals and President Mugabe. A lot of people here are saying it would not be safe for Grace Mugabe to stay in the country, that her life would be in danger, such is the animosity against her. But I also suspect that President Mugabe, for his own sense of his own dignity, would not want to go into exile. He is a stubborn man, and it sounds, from what we can understand of the negotiations, mostly speculation, as if he simply refuses to accept the reality that the world he knew, the bubble of power and patronage and adulation that he's lived in for 37 years, has vanished.
We're seeing reports that Southern African leaders will hold a crisis summit in Angola on Tuesday. Of course, this affects the whole region in Southern Africa. But can you just sum up the importance of this moment? Because Mr. Mugabe obviously held in great respect also for his historic role in the country's liberation. And yet we've seen this incredible swell of public opinion wanting him to go.
There's been a huge pushback here amongst many ordinary people and politicians against Zimbabwe's neighbours, saying, look, you've enabled Mugabe for years, now you're coming in and trying to negotiate. Back off, we'll sort this out as Zimbabweans together. This is our problem and we've made the decision to fix it. But this is extraordinary for a man who, while reviled in the West for the economic misery and the repression that he's brought in particularly the last 15 years to Zimbabwe, he is still seen, particularly in countries like South Africa, as an iconic figure for his role in fighting an armed fight for independence, for an end to white minority rule in Zimbabwe, which ended, of course, in 1980 with Mr. Mugabe taking power. And he's run this country ever since. Most people here do not know another leader. So the fact that he's being turfed out in such a humiliating fashion is something I think no one expected.
Andrew Harding, thanks very much indeed for that. We're just going to go back to you, Ben Brown, also in Harare. Do you think, that sense of him as an iconic figure will lead to anyone feeling sympathy for him, sadness that it's come to this?
Well, I think there's a measure of people wanting to have respect for their elders. That's a great African tradition here, and that elders should be treated with dignity. And in a sense, perhaps that is why another of the reasons the military haven't just thrown him out. They kept talking to him. They even let him out of house arrest to go to award graduates their degrees the other day, which was rather extraordinary. And he dressed up in academic robes and a mortarboard, and for him it looked like it was business as usual. So he's been treated with some dignity, really, since that military takeover. He was an iconic figure, but as Andrew was saying, he lost touch. His rule has been despotic, and there has been political repression and economic chaos here. And I think the question now that we have to start addressing is what follows, and no one really knows. Yes, there might be a transitional government, but if Emmerson is at the head of it, people have got questions about him. He was a strong man under Mugabe. He was the security chief. He's been accused of human rights abuses for a long time. People are saying, would he be that much better than Mugabe? Well, I think the importance of yesterday's demonstrations on the streets and all the euphoria there was, and that display of people power, was actually things have changed. It cannot just be a kind of another Mugabe in another guise continuing to rule this country with autocracy. People want to see real change. They want this country to be proper much better managed in terms of the economy, with real human rights and political freedoms. They want Zimbabwe to move on, and this has to be a pivotal moment when things do, whoever is the new president and whoever is the new government.
And Ben, is there any chance still of seeing any sort of unity government? And what about fresh elections?
Well, elections are planned for next year, and there is a lot of talk about a transitional government with Mnangagwa at the head of it. And don't forget, you know, if it hadn't been for Mugabe, he was the favoured candidate initially of Robert Mugabe as vice president, and then Grace Mugabe had him ousted. So Mnangagwa was Mugabe's man until quite recently. But yeah, one of the scenarios is that he would head a transitional government, leading maybe to those elections next year, that would try to get the economy back on its feet, that would pave the way to fresh elections, and that would include members of the opposition. The opposition at the moment pretty fragmented, pretty fractured, but perhaps if the opposition could be brought into a transitional government and work together, that would be good for Zimbabwe. But, you know, the path ahead is pretty uncertain. At the moment, people are just celebrating because they know Mugabe is gone now as head of ZANU-PF. But still, as we've been saying, important to stress, technically president of this country. I don't think anyone's going to be dancing in the streets until they hear that he has officially gone as president.
Ben Brown, for now in Harare, thanks very much.